Welcome to What a Word Is Worth, a space for creative minds to speak about viable ways to heal the world through writing and other inventive mediums. This is your host, Marianela Medrano. I am the founder of Palabra Training Center, where words are given as medicine. My guest today is someone I have known for decades and whose life I know very closely, which allows me to say that we are in front of one of the most beautiful souls to walk this earth. Reggie Marra, someone whose way of living is aligned with his values. He is a poet, writer, coach, educator, and someone who truly embodies healthy masculinity. And one of his poems actually inspired me to choose the title of this podcast. I owe him more than I could ever pay in this lifetime. Welcome, Reggie.
Thank you, Marianela. It's good to be here. And thank you for that generous introduction.
It's true. It's true. So Reggie, in my view, you are having quite a wholesome journey through life. You have managed to use words as your main instrument for both expressing and healing. How did you come to love words in this manner? And most importantly, to go to the core of the podcast, how did you come to see the healing power that lies in words and writing in particular?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. My introduction to the value and power of words was that reading when I was a child was encouraged. We had encyclopedia, we had dictionaries, we had other books. And so reading was considered a good thing when I was growing up. So that was the initial foray. I think I've been blessed with good teachers through elementary, middle school, and high school. And then I really started to zero in. I'd love to be able to go back to like famous writers and all, but I really zeroed in on the power of language when I heard a song on the radio when I was 16 years old. And the beginning of the lyric is this: I have seen the morning burning golden on a mountain in the skies, aching with the feeling of the freedom of an eagle when she flies. Now, it was Chris Christopherson. That was right around 1970, 71. And I could tell a whole long story, which I won't, but I found out who he was: Rhodes Scholar, songwriter, et cetera, and what he had sacrificed in order to follow his soul, I would say, to become a songwriter and eventually a singer-songwriter. He really kind of lit the fire in me. And, at the beginning, I wanted to be like him. I don't have any musical talent, so I wasn't going to be a band leader or a singer-songwriter. But his primary strength was in the lyrics. I mean, he was a writer and a poet, really. So that was the two kickoffs: a love of reading, which is encouraged, hearing Christopherson's work at the time, and then the healing piece. Interestingly, although I didn't know it at the time, the first time I used writing as an attempt to heal was that same year. And it's a small, often forgotten anecdote in my life, but even though you wouldn't know it right now, I had fairly long hair in high school and thereafter. And I was accosted by an assistant principal in my high school, a guy that I didn't know. He didn't know me. And he basically didn't drag me, but convinced me into his office and said that if I didn't have my hair cut by the following Monday, he was going to throw me out of school. And I thought that was unfair. I was very deferential to authority at the time, so I didn't know how to defend myself or speak up for myself. So I went home and I wrote about it, about how unfair it was. And that was probably the first time I can remember using writing in that way. And I'm fortunate that was an assistant principal in a Catholic high school in New York, telling me to get my hair cut, and it wasn't, the barrel of a gun or the blade of a knife or something out on the street. So that would, then there's a lot that happened in the ensuing 50 years or so.
Yes, but it's interesting, right? By coming upon this authority and feeling, I guess, the oppressive nature of the demand, you found your voice, and you began to use it. And part of the healing, right? It's always finding our voice. So along those lines, I have seen you teach about voice, and I have admired actually the easiness with which you teach a very complex subject. And in your own words, voice both includes and transcends the physical sounds we make when we speak, or the gestures we employ when we sign, or the marks on the page or screen we make when we write. And it presents us and represents who we are beyond the explicit or implicit meanings of the words we express, the stories we tell, and how we tell them is what you have written about voice. So tell us more about, if I am right in saying that that was your way to getting to voice by resisting an oppressive demand. Tell us more about the importance of finding one's voice.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, and just as an asterisk next to that, the quote that you read, I was heavily influenced at the time I wrote that by numerous other voices, but more specifically around the concept of voice by Carol Gilligan's In a Different Voice, and Tony Hoagland's posthumously published, and I forget the title of it, but he has a small volume just on voice. I don't remember the title exactly, which was published in the last 2 years. So those were influencing me when I wrote that. But more to the point, and I appreciate your point, you're suggesting that, not suggesting, but reinforcing that when I was younger, meaning childhood, throughout most of my adolescence until the vice principal told me to cut my hair, I didn't really have, we all have a voice, but my voice was influenced by authority, and my job was to make sure my voice didn't interfere with the authority figures, whether it was my parents, a teacher, or the selective service, sending people to Vietnam. And it took me quite a number of years to begin to find my own voice. And the example of Christofferson, who by the time he was 33 had lived several lifetimes in my, so he was a good model beyond the writing for me about finding your own voice and living your way into it. So what was the question again?
What is the importance of finding our voice as writers and as individuals, I will say, right? Not necessarily published writers, but
yeah, I mean, so I'm glad you said writers and individuals, because writing, I mean, voice for me is the outward manifestation of purpose or soul work or one's sacred dance. What Bill Plotkin refers to as one's unique ecological niche, one's true place in the world. And once you find that, once any one of us finds our true place in the world, our authentic voice then is allowed to emerge. In fact, I would say beyond being allowed to emerge, it can't help but emerge. It's required to emerge. So I kind of conflate, even though I can tease them apart, I conflate the idea of voice, authenticity, true identity, true self,
Mhm.
and the idea of one's true place in the world. Those all, they are different manifestations of the same entity or concept.
Yeah, that is beautiful, and I love how you rephrase it, voice as the hourly manifestation of our sacred dance, which is the sacred dance is how we ultimate show up. And it's bringing me then to something you wrote about in Enough with the Talking Points, because I think it relates. I'm referring to your addressing cultural givings or conditionings, and the impact they have if left unexamined. You describe cultural givings as provisions we receive at birth and throughout our earliest years, and our direct experiences, our beliefs, and the world that our family hands down to us, and the culture at large. So these cultural givens or conditioned beliefs, in my view, have the potential to create a sense of uniqueness that separates us from others or from the other. So in going back, I don't want us to, this is still within the voice, but I want to veer more now to how do we heal from this exile, this sense of exile, or what in Buddhism is called the myth of separation. So I think I just packed like 3 different questions here. But let's go to this idea of unexamined cultural givens that then creates or have the potential to create a sense of isolation and the myth of separation. And my question to you, if you agree with what I'm saying, how do we heal that?
Yeah, so that's an important question and a big one. And just really quickly on cultural givens, every human being everywhere throughout history was given something by their time and place and family of origin of birth. I mean, so nobody doesn't get that. Everybody gets it. Just a quick snapshot, and it includes geography and chronology too. So year of birth matters, who your parents are matters, their ethnicities, their self-identities, their belief systems, and then your earliest experiences, because what happens to a child gives the child a sense of the world as well. So everybody has that. Mine was 1954, general New York City area, Yonkers, New York, Italian American Catholic. That's what I was given. America was the greatest country in the world. The Catholic Church was the one true religion. And there were other religions that were okay, but they weren't the true one. And so much of what I was given in my earliest years was mythical. It was well intended, but it ended up not bearing out over time. To the point, and again, everyone has their own. So the first step is to recognize that you have cultural givens. You have this built-in stuff from childhood. And without reflection on that and the willingness to examine it and embrace what still resonates and makes sense in terms of your direct experience of the world, and let go of those things that no longer make sense or don't reflect your direct experience of the world. In the absence of that, you will have a very unique stuckness in terms of who you think you are. And some people are given more accurate and healthier cultural givens than others. It depends on a lot of circumstances. But to the point of healing, the first step is recognize that you're not privy to all of the truth. You have some things that were given that may be misleading you. So examine those. I'll fast forward to the end and then come back and tell you how I got there. So, the biggest healing, the final healing, is to see, and I'm going to just stay on humans for now. I'm going to avoid going out to all that is the whole universe, other than human beings, the hawks and the giraffes and the skunks and the earthworms. I'm going to leave them out for now, even though they're included and they're important too. Is recognizing that we're all the same species, that Homo sapiens, human beings on this planet, regardless of where their feet touch the ground on the planet, are all part of the same species, and they all had exactly the same beginning. And I'm going to use a phrase now that people misunderstand. It has 3 words in it. And I'm going to say, I don't care. But I'm saying that in a certain context. And I don't care if you believe that through science or some specific religious story, because both the religious origin stories and the scientific origin stories point to the same origin. None of them say, well, some humans came about this way and some came that. They all had either, the Big Bang, or, the 7 days in the Judeo-Christian tradition, 6 days of creation and, give God a day off, 7th day with rest. So the work is to be able to recognize, enjoy, celebrate, wonder at, and appreciate the extraordinary diversity of human viewpoints, of human appearances, of human talents, of human aspirations, of human dreams. I mean, the diversity is astounding.
Yeah.
So to be able to embrace all of that and include that one place where we're identical, and we all have marks. We share one really important trait. We refer to it as a belly button or navel. But that's the moment, that is the remnant of our, physical separation from our mothers when the umbilical cord is cut. And every human being has one of those. Some have an innie, some have an outie, but it's the same, truncated umbilical cord. So finding that balance to appreciate the diversity and the identical origin, and to say, oh, you and I are a lot more alike as humans than we are different. Now, depending on the cultural givens, that might be a fairly easy move to make, or it could be extraordinarily difficult. And I've lived long enough now to know that some people never make that move. You can die thinking that, my group is right and true, and those people are not. And that's our work as human beings, among other things. So I think I kind of touched on the answer to the question there somewhere.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking though, I so much like what you're saying about the, umbilical cord as a kind of a signal, a lamppost for our common humanity. And that if we remember that, let's say that we have managed to transcend certain stages, that will give us that sense of remembering. And let's say if we encounter individuals who haven't made the transition or the transcending move, that if we are paying attention, if we have that sense of common humanity, we will be mirroring or seeing ourselves in that person. I don't know if I'm clear in what I'm saying in terms of what I think I heard you say, that we all move at different pace, depending on the cultural givens we receive, and that the move doesn't make us better or worse than the others, but that is, we are all in living a human experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I would just add language to it that later, I'm going to just introduce the word development into the conversation because that's what we're talking about. And just as a quick aside to that, in my understanding of an engagement of development, increasing development, in other words, later development, is not better or right, but it does have these traits. It's more inclusive. If it's healthy development, it tends to be more inclusive. My worldview includes more comprehensive, more balanced. And by definition, then, if you include more and it's more comprehensive, it becomes more complex. So right and wrong, black and white is fairly simple, straightforward, and simple. Multinational, to use a phrase, diversity, multi-language diversity, multi-skin pigmentation diversity, multi-sexual orientation and identity diversity, by definition, is more inclusive, more comprehensive, strives for balance, but has to be more complex because there's just more going on there. So when someone at a later stage of development, let's just talk about healthy development now, encounters somebody at an earlier stage of development, the person at the later stage has more responsibility in the relationship and the conversation because he or she can see and hold more perspectives. And so it's really important for that person to be able to recognize the common humanity, even though they might disagree with some political stance or whatever it might be. They have an obligation, I would say, to recognize where the other person is and honor their humanity and still be able to disagree in a vigorous, rigorous, respectful way. So we're not saying, that development says you're no longer allowed to disagree with anybody. We're not saying that at all. In fact, I would say you have an ethical obligation to disagree with certain things.
Correct.
How you manifest the disagreements carries with it some more accountability or responsibility.
Yeah. And you know what I'm thinking, Reggie, that in one of your poems, the one you delivered for the International Association of
Speaker Association,
Speakers Association, will you agree? And the title of the poem is actually escaping me. I know it's glaze and there is chocolate, but I'm not recalling the full title right now. Will you agree that that poem summarizes what we are saying right now?
If I agree with that, it feels a bit grandiose to say that poem.
Well, I can say it. I was the one who said
well,
it.
So the title of the poem was Fillet of Soul, S-O-U, with a dark night glaze. And that's what I was aspiring to. I mean, the joke was I was trying to capture 13.7 billion years of evolution in a 6.5 minute poem. So that was the running joke about the poem. So it was a big picture type thing. And I think it succeeded. It succeeds as that. I mean, obviously, in order to capture that many billions of years in 6 minutes, you have to leave a lot out. But in terms of the big picture, yeah, I think that's what I was talking about in that poem. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I can say, if you don't want to say it, I think the poem is brilliant and was able to capture so much in the how many lines the poem is, but you deliver it in 6 minutes. So there is so much we can say on this, but I want us to move towards something that is not totally disconnected from this, which is our awareness of what it is to walk this earth and the the journey as having a final point. And I have had the privilege to witness you embracing serious work with open heart and a sense of humor. And I especially remember the work you did around death and dying, especially what came after you read Stephen Levine's A Year to Live. And I want to bring another voice here other than Levine's, and it's Frank Ostaseski, who says that death is not waiting for us at the end of a long road, but that death is always with us in the marrow of every passing moment, and that she is the secret teacher hiding in plain sight, helping us to discover what matters most. So Ostaseski talks about life and death as being a package deal. If you take it apart, it's no longer wholesome. So I think you have examined, and I remember a particular workshop that you offered around this theme. I don't know if that was close to 20 years ago, but you had an alarm going off and kind of signaling the moment of death. And I also saw you grapple with this at so many other levels. So can you tell us what has transpired for you after embracing death and dying and grief as teachers?
Yeah, so that's a pretty simple and lighthearted topic. That was a joke. There's the sense of humor. So I'm always careful to say too much about death, since I haven't experienced it firsthand. In terms of the big death, the final, I'll just call that, big death is the brain and the heart stop, as a human being. And I believe that we get all these little practice deaths throughout our lives. So everything from, moving from childhood to adolescence to young adulthood to adulthood to, if we're lucky, elderhood. But even just moving, if you move your place of residence, you're dying to, what you knew. If you lose a job, or if you just decide to change jobs, anything, we have many opportunities to deal with endings, to practice for the big ending. So I would say that my views continue to evolve, since I'm definitely, when I first began to look at death and dying, I believed I was much closer to my birth than to my death. I had no way of knowing that, which I'll get back to. Now I know I'm much closer to my death than to my birth at my age, unless I live to be 140 something, 130 something. There's a certain vitality that the knowledge of death and dying provides us as human beings, because we know that our time is finite. And if we're in touch with our voice, our unique ecological niche, our sacred dance, or our soul work, whatever it happened, however we refer to it, not that we can't relax, go on vacation, put our feet up and enjoy ourselves, but we want to use our time well. We want to manifest, what we're here to manifest. And I'm not familiar with the work of, say his last name again, Frank what?
Ostaseski.
Okay,
I might be killing it, but I'm pretty sure that's.
Okay. So I'm not familiar with his work, but one of the, and besides Stephen Levine's work, A Year to Live, which I did that practice for a year. And one of the most helpful and really straightforward teachings that I received was through Joan Halifax, who quoted the 9 contemplations of a teacher, which basically, I'm not going to remember all 9, but basically things as simple as, you don't know when you're going to die. You don't know how you're going to die. You don't, with every breath you take, you're closer to your last breath. Everyone is going to die. If you hold that with a kind of a morbid fascination, it's not helpful because it's just morbid. But if you hold that as a simple truth, or even as a complex truth, that's among the best motivators not to spend your life on small things, not to spend your life, worrying about, somebody took my parking space or not. And sometimes that can really matter. So I don't mean to minimize that, but generally speaking, there are worse things in the world. So, I was fortunate to be with my mom when she took her last breath. I was with my dad about 7 hours before he took his last and about 3 hours afterwards. And, with my sister about 6 hours after hers. But even before those, I just knew several high school students who died long before their times through violence. So I began attuning to death. Probably the first time was 1979, when I was a high school teacher and one of my students was killed. So I'm going off on a kind of a tangent. I want to kind of reel myself in. Did I come anywhere near answering the question?
And you mentioned John Halifax, and actually Ostaszewski works very closely with her, and he actually in his book, whose title is escaping me right now, but he extends 5 invitations to us. The first one is don't wait. Just then welcome everything, push away nothing, he says. Bring your whole self to the experience and find a place to rest in the middle of things, and then cultivate the don't know mind. So I think, what you were saying aligns also with that as well. As much as I want to stay lingering in the topic, I don't want the time to fly by without us talking about your forthcoming book, Healing America's Narratives. To me, in my view, the book is brilliant at so many levels. Primarily because you take the history of this country with everything, the good, the bad, the in between, and you turn all that into a guide for transforming the self. And it is actually a guide to embracing a new narrative that discerns between the cultural givens we were talking about and other ways in which we are shaped and the genuine person we aspire to be. So to me, that book is a manual on becoming fully human and embracing love as the universal language it is. And, you can talk, I don't know, you can take it whatever you want, but I think I want our audience to hear about this idea of becoming fully human by embracing the suchness of our life, with that attention in the what is here and what we don't know, the unknown, which is dying. So let me see if I can simplify the question. What are the main components of this book that can bring us closer to being fully human? to seeing how to be fully human.
Yeah, thank you for that. Another easy, small question. So to say being fully human, being more fully human, what that means to me is not leaving anything out. You said the good, the bad, and the in between, and that's, for me, I appreciate that phrasing, but I want to make sure we say the ugly as well.
Well, that's included.
Yeah.
It's included in the in between.
Okay, but so I just want to say the title and the subtitle, because they are together are a good launching point to answer the question. So the title is Healing America's Narratives. And I actually struggled with whether it should be America's narrative, because there is an overarching American narrative, or narratives, because there's the overarching big one. And then there's many, 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 many small ones. So I went with the plural. The subtitle is The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. And just to clarify, shadow is in the Jungian sense, that which we deny, repress, don't know we have, and we tend to project onto others. Sometimes people use the word shadow as the dark side and the thing I don't like about myself, and that's a fine usage. But if you know about it and you don't like it, it's not shadow in the way I'm using the word shadow in the book. So the argument is that if we can balance healthy feminine energy, which is more embracing and communal and relational, and that's a reduction of it, but that's close for good. It's good enough for now. With healthy masculine energy, which is more about independence and assertiveness and moving into an individualism, and own our projections, our shadow, we can be healthier as a nation and as individuals. And more to the point, and this is the argument that is made in the book, it's not the only argument, but it's in there, that if we really get honest about the shadow of this country, it's primarily manifest through an iteration of the unhealthy masculine. It doesn't embrace, it pushes away, it others, it separates, it doesn't encourage community. So in order to do that, we need to do it in two levels, individually and as a nation. Doing it as a nation doing it individually is tricky, because you have to be willing to engage in shadow work and self-reflection. And not, I would guess that only a minority of people in the United States actually engage shadow work. I wouldn't know a number, but I don't read about it in any of the mainstream media, so I'm guessing it's not worth covering. And then collectively, the only real way we can talk about collective shadow is by working with our individual shadows, because a nation, unlike an individual human being, doesn't literally have a psyche. It doesn't have its own shadow. And so a collective shadow is really the cumulative effect of enough people in a given nation, in this case, the United States, who share certain shadow elements in common. And if enough people share that, doesn't have to be a real majority, but if enough people share it, it shows up as the denial for the whole country. And that work is, I would argue that if we don't do that work individually and collectively, democracy as we would like it to be, representative democracy in this country, is going to gradually fade away. And it's not, it's right now, it's very different than it was when I was growing up. And just to be clear, when I was growing up, it wasn't perfect, because when I was a kid, Jim Crow laws were still being practiced in the South. The Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts hadn't been passed yet. Vietnam was about to take place. So I'm not speaking like make America great again, because anybody who uses that kind of a phrase deserves this inquiry. when was America great and for whom?
Right.
So I'm not saying that,
Mhm.
but I grew up through the civil rights era, 60s into the 70s, the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal, and various other things. And I would argue that the collective America is in worse shape right now than it was even in those times. So I kind of went off there away from
Yeah.
the book. If you ask me a specific
Well,
question.
no, I'm glad that you said that, because it is, it is worrisome where we are. And, in the book, in Healing America's Narratives, when I say that the book is brilliant, I'm not trying to be cute or to impress you. The book is, because of how you were able to package, all these complexities and all these realities, and the kind of, the amount of research that went into it. It's really impressive. And one of the things that makes it, one of the aspects that makes it so relevant is that you bring narratives from opposite, alienated, privileged, unprivileged, marginalized perspectives to give us a compelling scenario into which to understand what's happening in America. Now, in order for someone to write a book like that, you have to know how to listen. You have to know how to hold perspectives. And I think that's what comes very clearly in the book for me. And it's, after I read it, I think what you did, you metabolized, you digested so much for us so we can get it in this book. So going back though to the importance of listening, can you tell us more about the importance of not canceling other perspectives just because they don't go along with our perspective? Because I think that's what you were pointing to, at the beginning of your answer.
Yeah, so that's actually, I give a chapter to that in the book. It's, I think the title of the chapter is Bullied, Woke, and Canceled in the Polarized States of America. And I speak about woke culture and cancel culture. That language, woke and canceled, is relatively new. It's less than a decade old, I would say, in terms of contemporary United States culture. But the concept of being awake, woke, and the concept of canceling others, neither of those is new. So without being too flip, this is, we can go back to 2,500 years ago, and there was a famous awakening. Are you a saint? No, I'm awake. That's Buddha's response. So he sat under the tree and he woke up, and that meant something then. In terms of canceling, I would argue that, and again, this is a specifically United States of American-based conversation and book. It's not the only place this has happened in human history, but it's the one the book focuses on. I would argue that the Portuguese, Spanish, and English colonizers who kidnapped Africans and brought them across the Atlantic Ocean actually literally were canceling an entire people. They didn't have that language then, but they basically said, we're more woke than you. We have Christianity, you don't. You're savages, we're not. You're slaves. So that in effect was a cancellation of African peoples coming across. And then they were enslaved when they got here, and they became, African-American slaves. The Native Americans who were here when the discoverers of the New World got here, effectively the explorers, the colonizers, did the same thing to them. Primarily in this conversation, it was the British, because the United States of America was basically, had a British foundation, not a Spanish, which was more South America, Caribbean, Central America, or Portuguese, which didn't get too much of the spoils, because they basically got, Brazil. But, the British colonists and the founders of America and their successors effectively canceled the over 500 Native American nations, American Indian nations. So the idea of canceling is not new. The specific practice of it, using social media to ruin somebody's life, is new. And for anyone, left or right, who truly believes and says out loud that he or she believes in the equality of all human beings and wants equal rights and wants the 14th Amendment to protect everyone, under due process, equal protection of the laws. Anyone who would cancel, deliberately try to shame somebody else, ruin their life or their job because they disagree with them, doesn't really want equality for everyone. Now, there's an asterisk there. Have some people who have been canceled committed crimes? Yes. And if, in fact, you want a democracy that's based on a rule of law, which doesn't always work, and it definitely doesn't work equally for everyone, that's a problem. But if, in fact, you want to live in this democracy, and you do want the police to come when somebody's breaking into your house or whatever, you have to trust that the rule of law will take care of that lawbreaker. And when it doesn't, that's when you exercise your First Amendment rights of freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, to contest and go to the polling booth. But the idea of trying to ruin somebody because you can, based on contemporary 21st century technology, anyone who's engaging in that behavior is not working toward the greater good of humanity, or even of the greater good of the citizenship of the United States, in my estimation.
Yeah, and as I said to you before, I think the final two chapters of your book invite and force the reader to show up.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's important, right? That you're asking us to pick up the scraps and put the world back into a cohesive whole in which the masculine and the feminine dance in unison. And that to me is invaluable. Is this a fair way to describe your intention in writing the book? Just to summarize and use this opportunity to add anything else that you want to say about the book.
Yeah, so I appreciate that question, the way you asked it. I mean, my intention in writing the book, it began as a couple of blog posts in 2016, 2018, because I grew up, I'm about 7 or 8 years younger than Donald Trump. And I grew up with him in the greater New York City area. He appeared in the local news when he was a young heir, and while his father was still alive. And that he would get close to the White House, this is before he was elected, that he became the Republican candidate, was upsetting to me because I had a sense of who he is and his general buffoonery and incompetence as a human being. What happened when I began writing the book, it was more about him as representing, as one human being representing all of the traits of our collective American shadow, which include, I identify 9 of these in the book, and I'm not going to remember all 9 right now, but generally speaking, ignorance, arrogance, greed, violence, untrustworthiness, excess, bigotry, etc. He had all of those. When he was younger, he had them, and he has them still. what happened as I began to write, to expand the blog post out into a larger book, and I can't take credit for this, it's just like, the universe is taking care of me. I began to see connections, and I sought 5 major examples of America's shadow. And then I used chapter 8 in the book to apologize to all the other examples that I didn't focus one chapter on. But the 5 that I zeroed in on, to again, as examples of the shadow in this country, were the fear of the feminine and subjugation of women. So women as one. Native American history, African American history, the war in Vietnam, what led up to it and what followed it, and then the post 9/11 wars on terror, for a lot of reasons which are too detailed to go into right now. Those 5 show the repetition of the same shadow traits for the 246 years of this country's existence, which is how old it is now in terms of being a country. Obviously, its gestation period before it was born in 1776 adds, another few hundred years to it. So seeing that, that all of these historical issues or events carried shadow with them, the work then became to, okay, what can I say about women, Native Americans, African Americans, Vietnam, and Iraq and Afghanistan, the wars there, in 30 to 35 chapters, because there's been a lot written on each of those, obviously, that make the point, and don't claim to be exhaustive histories, obviously, but make the point. And I was just, guided by something bigger than myself in terms of how that came together. And then the final 2 chapters, I had to bring the book home, because if I could have expected the amount of really powerful processes, resources, practices that I could have included in the final 2 chapters, chapters 11 and 12, I could have added another 400 pages to the book, which would have made it over 1,000 pages, which that includes the endnotes and the index. So it's not, the actual text of the book is about 360 pages. So I had to bring it in, but I do provide resources and a bibliography for people who really want to do the work. And that's the invitation.
Yes, absolutely.
Don't just read this book, practice it. See what it says, and how am I contributing to the collective shadow, and how am I helping to stop the projections, if I am at all, and what can I do about it? In the absence of that, I think we're going to continue to be in some trouble.
So I thank you for what I say, doing the research, doing the metabolizing of so much for us, and for putting it out there. I hope our audience will purchase the book when it comes out in October.
Yeah, it'll be out in October, and they can get some previews and some information about the book at healingamericasnarratives.com. No other punctuation, so no spaces, no other periods, just Healing America's Narratives. There's no apostrophe between the A and the S. .com. There are some excerpts and updates, but we're shooting for early October release. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Reggie, for this time and for entertaining my questions.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your podcast.
Sure. Thank you for listening to What a Word is Worth. You can access today's interview at Anchor, YouTube, and other platforms. And if you like what you heard here today, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. And also, if you found our program beneficial, leave us a review. I am with you in love and compassion, always, always, always.